So you bring us to a great jumping off point there, and I'm glad we actually got that bedrock laid rather quickly, as to our place inside God's kingdom, um, us being given dominion of the world, and then the lead up to what we did to fumble the ball, as it were. You describe inside your book this not I wouldn't say it was one event, because if we're talking about the sons of God, the Watchers coming and taking brides, any of whom they saw, um, I imagine there were any number of wedding ceremonies, and as you described, with all the pomp and circumstance that would come with somebody wedding this being created directly of God. But the lead up to that, I want to get into that there. Uh, throughout your book, I know that you've done a ton of research into the Book of Enoch. So we have some extra biblical literature, some that is also very highly venerated. We have even the Ethiopian church; they still have the Book of Enoch inside their Bible that they pull from regularly. But I want to talk about Adam having dominion of the world, his sons having dominion of the world, and what happened to them that they gave up their birthright? What happened to them that they gave it away?
I think what happened in the Genesis 6 affair is a precursor to what is going to ultimately unfold at the end of the age. So if we begin from this starting point, that Adam and his offspring have dominion of the earth, they're going to now spread out over the whole face of the earth and populate in various cultures and build cities and do everything that human beings do. Remembering, of course, that they were supposed to do this in allegiance to the kingdom of heaven and to rightly and justly represent the king of heaven as his vice regents on earth, which we began to screw up immediately.
Yep.
So that was the purpose, and that was what was supposed to be unfolding after the creation of Adam. So when you fast forward and you get to generations down the line, you get to, according to the Book of Enoch, Jared, you encounter this very interesting interruption of that plan, the interruption of the protocol of human beings spreading out over the earth and having dominion and being the vice regents of planet Earth. And that interruption is really, it is caused by a company of interloping extraterrestrial beings. I mean, I can think of no more accurate way to describe it than that. And these beings are called Watchers in the Book of Enoch. And the Watcher denomination is not exclusive to the Book of Enoch, and it's not an extra biblical term. Indeed, we find it in the Book of Daniel. And a very interesting scene in Daniel in which a human king, Nebuchadnezzar, by the way, I should put a bookmark here for a moment and make sure that I make the point that although we are the vice regents of the earth, the kingdom of heaven, specifically the king and his council, reserve the right, it is their prerogative to intervene whenever they want, whenever they see fit, to enthrone or dethrone any human ruler as they see fit. So that's an important detail associated with human dominion. We aren't allowed just to do whatever. There are consequences. And I'll return to that point in just a moment, because there's another important thing we need to say before we move on. But Nebuchadnezzar was obviously a wicked king, Babylonian king, who was an affront to the kingdom of heaven. And in this very intriguing scene in Daniel, he is being judged and sentenced by a council of heaven. And this council is referred to as the Holy Watchers. Same term, Irin in Aramaic, the Holy Watchers, the Watchers. And these Watchers are presiding over the judgment of Nebuchadnezzar, who is ultimately sentenced to madness, to several years of madness. And that's a very intriguing story. I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. But so you see in the biblical narrative itself, you have the Watchers making an appearance. And who are the Watchers in this narrative? They are this heavenly council, what the late Michael Heiser would describe as the divine council.
Mhm.
They're the council of the king. The king has a council. Who is the king? The king is the Son of God. And so we know when we get to the Book of Enoch, and Enoch is a pseudepigraphical text, which means that the authorship is unknown, basically. It claims to be written by Enoch, but it obviously is not in certain parts. Although the earliest portions may indeed have been written by Enoch, or at least were preserved in oral tradition from the original writings or words of Enoch. But it is in the Book of Enoch, and almost solely in the Book of Enoch, almost exclusively, not entirely, but almost exclusively in the Book of Enoch, where we find the narrative, the larger narrative of the Watchers, the ones who interloped into man's domain. These Watchers are named. There's 200 of them. And the initial, what I call the first cause of the Watchers' transgression is very apparent. It's apparent in Genesis 6 as well. Genesis 6 is making reference to Enoch directly. Genesis 6 is referencing the story that was widely known and that was well known and widely disseminated among the ancient Hebrews. And that is the story that comes from the Book of Enoch. And in both Genesis 6 and, interestingly, in Enoch chapter 6, the first verses of both, we have this perplexing statement that describes that describes the sons of God. The Septuagint calls them angels.
Mhm.
The Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. That the sons of God are looking at the daughters of men and are finding them to be very attractive and are lusting after them. Now, in my book, I'm not going to do it here because it's a very lengthy digression. But in my book, I highlight the fact that if you're reading the Genesis 6 and Enoch 6, specifically Genesis 6, and the theological furniture in your brain does not get rearranged just from the notion that the sons of God are lusting after the daughters of men, after the daughters of Adam, then you simply do not understand what is being implied in the text.
Hear, hear.
And you cannot glibly read those words. You cannot casually pass over those words and with your theology intact, let's say. Because most of us have a westernized theology and a westernized perspective of the biblical narrative, which simply does not synchronize with the Hebraic view, with the Hebraic/ancient Near Eastern perspective of this story, because this story was told in several different cultures. So you have these sons of God, the Benai Elohim, who are lusting after human women. And again, we'll sidestep that deeper conversation there. People can read about it in my book, should they desire to explore that further. And you should. Whether you read my book or not, you definitely should ruminate on the fact that they're lusting after human women. And then they decide that they want to do three things. So the first cause of the Watcher's transgression is lust, right? Something that we can all understand. Lust. That's it. They lusted after the daughters of men. But we can further define their motivations, because they did not just want to sleep with human women, to have sexual intercourse with human women. Rather, they wanted to take the women as wives. They wanted to wed the women. Okay, so that's the first cause. They lust after them. They're physically attracted to them. Hear what I say. They are physically attracted to them, and they want to wed them, not come down and treat them as harlots, rather marry these women. They're lusting after them. They want to take them as wives. That's the first motivation. The second motivation is what we read as a consequence of this lust and desire to marry the daughters of Adam. In Genesis, it doesn't directly associate the consequence in regard to the steps that came between the angels lusting and then the consequence, which was the Nephilim. But the Book of Enoch does weave the narrative, so to speak, that takes place between the watchers lusting, desiring the daughters of men, and the progeneration of the Nephilim. And what happens is the watchers, they descend to the earth. Before they descend to the earth, actually, they make a pact. They bind themselves by mutual imprecations, the Book of Enoch says. And what that means is we're all in this together, and we will all suffer the consequences, whatever befall. That's what it means. And they bind themselves by this oath. We will all share in the consequence. And they knew that this would be a great transgression. So they bound themselves by mutual imprecations, and then they descended to the summit of Hermon, Mount Hermon. And once they descended on the summit of Hermon, which is, by the way, called the Mountain of Oath, and has been for time immemorial, they descended into the plains, and they began to choose for themselves wives, each one a wife among the daughters of men. And I do not believe that they were walking through the villages and grabbing whatever fair maiden that they desired and throwing her over their shoulder, or forcibly grabbing her by the arm and dragging her along.
Yeah.
Rather, they're down observing. Perhaps you might imagine the watchers, this is how I would imagine it, walking through these villages, cloaked, and silently, quietly observing and choosing for themselves in their minds which women they would like to wed, and then finding out who their fathers are.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because what the watchers did next is they struck a bargain. Now, this is not implicit in the Enochian tale, in the narrative of First Enoch, but it is inferred. They definitely struck a bargain, but I believe that the bargain was specifically in regard to their wives. In other words, they chose the women they wanted to wed, they desired. They went to the fathers, and this is where the bargain takes place. A legal transaction, by the way, with the vice-regents of the earth, from these extraterrestrial interlopers who have no authority on earth, okay? Remember that. We have to return to that. So they strike a bargain with the fathers, and they say, I want to marry your daughter. And perhaps at this point they reveal to all of the people who they are. Maybe they decloak,
Mm-hmm.
and they're these very tall, probably extremely handsome young men. Probably, I would imagine they're 6.5 feet tall. I have reasons for believing that. Very, very handsome men, and no, they do not have wings. And so now the fathers are not dealing with mere men who want to wed their daughters, but gods. right? Demigods who've come to the earth who want to marry their daughters. But the Watchers make this offer. We give us your daughter's hands in marriage, and we will give you in turn knowledge, which will equate to technology. And specifically the knowledge, it says in the Book of Enoch that the sons of Adam were striving to learn. Now, I believe, and this is just my own hypothesis, that it was the daughters of Cain specifically that the Watchers wanted to wed. And I have some reason, you can find that out in the book. It's neither here nor there, but I do believe it was the daughters of Cain, and I believe the transaction was happening with the offspring of Cain, and who were legal representatives of the human species at large. Both lines of Adam were legitimate, the line of Seth and the line of Cain. So, and we're certainly human,